So then McCain and Payne started doing something really dangerous. We started thinking, they said. What does he care about? And how can that be a doorway to drama? He cares about bringing lilies to Goldberry. Really? Really, Rings of Power? We're going to shoehorn Tom Bombadil into this mangled story of Middle-earth? The one character that even Peter Jackson, in what could be widely considered the greatest movie trilogy of all time, he said, in the plot of The Lord of the Rings, in our movie, in its most simple form, it's Frodo carrying the ring. Eventually, he has to go to Mordor and destroy the ring. So, what does Old Man Willow contribute to the story of Frodo carrying the ring? What does Tom Bombadil ultimately really have to do with the ring? I know there's ring stuff in the Bombadil episode. Yes, he doesn't care about the ring. The rings don't matter to him at all. He sees right through the ring. He sees it as a trinket. It's not important. But Jackson said, it's not really advancing our story. It's not really telling us things we need to know. That, in fact, echoes what Tolkien said about Bombadil as well. Let me read that. Before I do, make sure you like, make sure you subscribe. Check out our podcast, Exploring Tolkien. Look it up on any podcast app or any web browser at all. You'll find us there. We hope you listen. We dive deep into Tolkien and hold today's culture, their feet to the fire a little bit. Before I look at the article with you, let's read what Tolkien wrote so we're on exactly the same page. We're coming from the same foundation for what Tolkien thought Bombadil was. Now, this is from a letter in 1954 to Naomi Mitchison, who was an editor, I believe, or worked on the books in some form. She had some questions for him, so he wrote a long response to her about this. And this is what he said about Bombadil. Tom Bombadil is not an important person to the narrative. I suppose he has some importance as a comment. I mean, I don't really write like that. He's just an invention who first appeared in the Oxford magazine about 1933, and he represents something that I feel important, though I would not be prepared to analyze the feeling precisely. I would not, however, have left him in if he did not have some kind of function. I might put it this way. The story is cast in terms of a good side and a bad side. Beauty against ruthless ugliness, tyranny against kingship, moderated freedom with consent against compulsion that has long lost any object save mere power, and so on. But both sides, in some degree, conservative or destructive, want a measure of control. But if you have, as it were, taken a vow of poverty, renounce control, and take your delight in things for themselves without reference to yourself, he's talking about Bombadil here, watching, observing, and to some extent knowing, then the question of the rights and wrongs of power and control might become utterly meaningless to you, and the means of power quite valueless. Remember that. The question of the rights and the wrongs of power and control might become utterly meaningless to you. Utterly meaningless. Bombadil does not care. And the means of power quite valueless. It is a natural pacifist view. Nothing matters, right? I just want my peace, which always arises in the mind when there is a war. But the view of Rivendell seems to be that it is an excellent thing to have represented, but that there are, in fact, things with which it cannot cope, and upon which its existence nonetheless depends. Bombadil's existence, as we'll learn right here, depended on the hobbits shaking the foundations of the world. Ultimately, only the victory of the West will allow Bombadil to continue or even to survive. Nothing would be left for him nothing would be left for him in the world of Sauron. So remember, what we're seeing here is that Bombadil, as he says, he just is Bombadil. He's nothing more. He's not a mover and shaker in the world. He likes his people. He liked Farmer Magan, the hobbits. He found love. He loves Goldberry, his wife, sweet Goldberry, the river woman's daughter, whom he lived with. But really, Bombadil was there as an adventurer along the way, not a mover and shaker. He took no position on the Rings of Power. He took no position on whether what he was doing to help the hobbits was actually pushing forth Frodo's story. Now, of course, the swords that the hobbits get from the Barrow-wights are very important because those are swords specifically made to rip soul from sinew, essentially, for the Nazgul. So that's why they're important. In the movies, it doesn't really matter because Aragorn gives them to him, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so Bombadil to Tolkien, he sees him as a pure pacifist. Nothing matters. I am not going to get involved. So then let's take a look at what we learned from J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay, who love to go back to the books.
Go back to the book, go back to the book, go back to the book.
Yeah.
And see how they're going to implement Tom Bombadil in the Rings of Power. So here's Vanity Fair's exclusive first look at Tom Bombadil in the Rings of Power. There you have him, Tom Bombadil in the Rings of Power. Drab, dreary, ugly. Look, I don't like the visuals at all. He is supposed to be a bright spark of hope, pure pacifism made manifest, pacifism and carelessness made manifest in his colors and his boots and the feather in his hat, which I don't see either here. So yellow boots, bright blue cloak. They miss the point here too. But let's get to the text because that's what really matters. J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay wanted to figure out exactly how he might turn up in their show, right? So they're already like, okay, we got to have a nod because the fans are going to love Bombadil, so we got to put him in. So what are they going to do? Well, here's what Payne says. There's a reason why he hasn't been in prior adaptations, because in some ways he's sort of an anti-dramatic character. Well, yeah, he's not a character who has a particularly strong agenda, and he observes drama, but largely doesn't participate in it. In the Fellowship of the Ring, the characters kind of just go there and hang out for a while. Yep. And Tom drops some knowledge on them. Yep. And then he saves them from the Bear White. That would have been important. And he saves them from Old Man Willow. That's kind of important. But he has knowledge that's not particularly relevant to anything that they're doing or about to do. Well, they're pretty much right at this point, right? This is correct. He doesn't participate in the driving plot of the story. He moves the characters along from the edge of his realm to the other edge of his realm, but that's about it. They go on to say this: he can be a force for good, but he is challenging to integrate dramatically in that he doesn't have an agenda. Right. That's exactly what Tolkien said. He doesn't care. He's not driving forward and pushing people to arrive at any particular end. Okay, well, that's good. You know that, right? So where are they going to go for this? Well, they continue to go on and say he has no clear dramatic function that would justify his inclusion in a really great movie adaptation. All right. You are arguing not for your case here of including him. He has no clear dramatic function that would justify his inclusion in a really great movie adaptation. But you're arguing that you are? All right. So he's whimsical and magical and almost verging on silly. Yes. Listen to Andy Serkis's reading of Tom Bombadil in his audiobook, The Lord of the Rings, that he reads. It's a great version, maybe too sing-songy for some people, kind of including me, but I think it hews very close to what Tolkien had intended for Bombadil to sound like. But also he has the wisdom of the ages and the music of the spheres and deep emotional wells of ancient history and myth, and his conception and function are tied to Norse myths and have deep roots in European fairy tale. All right. He's also a doll. He was based on a doll that one of his kids has. So weirdly, he's kind of the most Lord of the Rings thing in Lord of the Rings. Yeah, kind of. I mean, what does that even mean? He's the most Lord of the Rings thing in Lord of the Rings. He's the most, I think Michael was it in our podcast where we talked about him. He's the most fey. He's the most fairy-like thing because he's whimsical. He doesn't care about the things of the world. Like that's sort of the history of the fairy and the fae, and that's why that's how people know them. So I don't know what they mean by that. It's sort of saying it's like the most bread-like thing in bread. Well, okay, what does that even mean? And he was also the first thing you would cut if you were adapting into a film. Yes, you're adapting a film, but guess what? They're not. They're adapting it into a television show, and hence we're going to find out a way to tap into that. They're going to find out a way to tap into that. You know, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
You know, you read what others had done, and you took the next step. You didn't earn the knowledge for yourselves, so you don't take any responsibility. You stood on the shoulders of geniuses to accomplish something as fast as you could. Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
They keep making the case to not have him, and so we're a third of the way through the article, and there's another shot of him in his underclothes, dirty, with a belt and a big beard and no hat and boots. He looks more like a Confederate general, as my friend Dan said here, than anything else. So then McCain and Payne started doing something really dangerous. We started thinking, they said, what does he care about? And how can that be a doorway to drama? Well, that's funny because the question is, what does he care about? He cares about bringing lilies to Goldberry at home. He cares about his land and the water, but nothing around him. He doesn't care about anything out there. But they say, well, he cares about the natural world. No, he cares about the world around him. He doesn't care about the rest of it. This is made clear in Tolkien's words, right? He doesn't care about the ring in the Lord of the Rings, which I guess he would have known about if we're looking at him here in the Rings of Power. He would have known about the One Ring and would have done something about it if it was important to him then. Why isn't it important to him in the Lord of the Rings? This makes no sense. And we know he is a helper. He's not going to push you, but he will help you. Will he, though? Will he exit his realm to help you? didn't help the hobbits when the ring wraiths came by and went to the Shire and went to Buckland, right? There's no help there, and he didn't help anybody in the last lines of Elves and Men or the Near Nath Arnoediad or the any battle, right? There he didn't help. There's no evidence of him helping anywhere. They say this, and so traditionally he lives in this place called the Withywindle, which is a sort of almost enchanted forest. Yes, that's the only thing he cares about, because he can bring lilies home to Goldberry. I love this part. In our story, he has gone out to the lands of Rune, which we learn used to be sort of Edenic, like Eden, and green and beautiful, and now sort of a dead wasteland. Tom has gone out there to see what's happened as he goes on his various wanderings. And so he meets up Nori, the dirty little sociopath Harfoot, and he meets the stranger, or is it Poppy? I don't care. And at the end of the first season, right, we realize it's pretty much Gandalf there. So they say this: when he, Tom Bombadil, finally crosses paths with a stranger, you could say he has a desire to try to keep the destruction that has happened there from spreading to his beloved lands in the west. He nudges the stranger along his journey, which he knows will eventually protect the larger world. Again, what is the point? He doesn't care. Tolkien made it clear. This guy is not a mover and shaker in the historical timelines of the world. He lives for himself and his Goldberry and the Withywindle, the land around him, right? He is an adventure along the way. That is verbatim what Tolkien said. I needed an adventure along the way. He is not here to change the plot. And by doing this, they are rewriting Tolkien. And if they say here, let me read it. He nudges the stranger along his journey, which he knows will eventually protect the larger natural world that he cares about. No, doesn't care about the larger natural world. Never made clear anywhere in anything Tolkien wrote. So I'd say our Tom Bombadil is slightly more interventionist than you see in the books, but only 5 to 10%, not much. Okay, if you go from 0% to any percent, that is an infinite amount, because you're starting at nothing and you're going to something, right? There is no increase. You don't go from 0% and say, we're going to increase 0% by 5%. That's still 0%. So you cannot say that Bombadil is more of an interventionist. He only intervenes because the hobbits were along his path. Now you could say, was Ilúvatar the god of the universe, right? Was it one of those moments where his interjection in the world where things moved and shaked, right? The good fortune of Tom Bombadil being there was more than just good fortune. You could say that, but it wasn't Tom Bombadil making that choice. He was walking along gathering lilies for Goldberry. He had a bowl with lilies in it. And then we learned that an actor named Rory Kinnear will be playing Bombadil. This is his look right here. Sure, fine. I mean, look, I can't complain too much about Bombadil, although Michael in our podcast, Michael, my co-host at Exploring Tolkien, did point out that Brian Blessed would make a great Bombadil. In fact, I'm going to show you some of those AI-assisted versions of Bombadil that one of our members in our Discord chat created, and you can see how much better it would look than the Bombadil of the Rings of Power. So this is Rory Kinnear. He's going to play it. He's never really read Lord of the Rings, all that sort of stuff. Fine. You don't have to be a great actor to have read the story beforehand. They go on to talk about some of the details of Bombadil. They talk to the publishing director of the company's Tolkien titles, HarperCollins, a guy named Chris Smith. Talks a little bit about Bombadil, just kind of reiterates again, Bombadil is old. He's been there. He was there before the elves. Tolkien makes that clear. He was there in Eriador before the elves ever sailed to the west into Valinor. So before the elves even woke up on the shores of Lake Cuiviénen, he was there. He's been there a long time, not caring about stuff, because we don't hear about him at all in anywhere in the histories of Middle-earth, in the Silmarillion and the Calibeth, nowhere, nothing. In the appendices, he's not there. And Tolkien had a choice. He could have added him. He kept revising he kept revising Middle-earth and the cosmology of Middle-earth up until months before his death. But he never re-included, he never retrofitted Tom Bombadil into his stories. He left him there as a purposeful enigma, as something that is going to leave us questioning, and that's okay. We don't have to have an answer for everything. In fact, I don't think even Tolkien really knew exactly what Bombadil was, but he liked the character and he needed an adventure along the way, and he wanted something that embodied the spirit of the English Yorkshire countryside, and that's what Bombadil was. But they're making him into a fork in the road for the dirty little sociopaths and the not Gandalf. Right, there he is again. Wonderful. Okay, let's read this part. They had the idea that his summer cottage should be an oasis of life in the middle of the desert, dotted with lemon and orange trees and busy goats and lambs. All right, so he's he's like the grandmas and grandpas from Boston that go down to Florida in the winter because they needed they in the winter they go to the Shire, and in the summer they go to the edges of Rune. Why? I don't know. But they're going back to the book, right? To figure this out? No. And then we find out from Kinnear that he's going to have a Cornish accent in his summer cottage. That here's what he said. He said the big thing was, how is he going to talk? There are a lot of different dialects and accents going on throughout the show, and I wanted him to be somewhat distinct from those, but I also wanted to choose an accent that felt old, that was British, but felt like the oldest part of Britain. Okay. When he was thinking of the oldest part of Britain, that was where I naturally found myself being led. So they worked on getting a Cornish accent together. And then as we close out this article, they talk even further about why Bombadil is important to the story. When again we realize, and Peter Jackson realized, Bombadil is not important to the story. He doesn't push things forward. He's an adventure along the way. He's not a plot shifter. All right, but here's what Payne says. Season 1 sets the pieces on the chessboard, and in season 2, the pieces are in motion, and it's really about the villains. You've got Sauron, who's not cloaked behind the guise of the human refugee Halbro anymore. The audience knows he's Sauron, so now we're watching him maneuver as he's manipulating the burn-scarred, covered dark elf Adar. And dark elf, I don't think it means Morquendi, the elves who never saw the light of Valinor, or like Eöl, the dark elf in Tolkien's Silmarillion. Who's another big villain of the season? Okay, Adar is. Really, Tom is sort of a curiosity within that structure, because while it is darker, Tom Bombadil is singing and saying lines that could be nursery rhymes from children's poems. So he sort of defies the tonal shift of the rest of the season and is a real point of light amidst an otherwise sea of darkness. Okay, so we have the story of the Harfeet, the dirty little sociopaths nobody cares about because they haven't done anything yet. There's the overarching story of, the massive Doritos volcano that was created in order to create Mordor. You lift the plug on the dam and it runs down into the big chasm and it creates a volcano. But now we've got this point of light in that sea of darkness of Mordor on the edges of Rune that Tolkien never wrote about. Because we know, as we learned in last year's Vanity Fair article, that the driving question behind the production is, can we come up with a novel Tolkien never wrote and do it as the mega event series that could only happen now? Again, the answer is no, you can't. You are not Tolkien, and you don't have the chops to be Tolkien. Stop pretending. Even Peter Jackson couldn't get Tom Bombadil shoehorned into a 9-hour film, almost 10-hour film for The Lord of the Rings. 10 plus hours. Is it almost 11 with the extended editions? They're not even in that. And you're going to stick him into this story, and I don't know, like, here's the other thing. Make Gandalf his first staff, right? That's what we see back here. Is this Gandalf's staff? Like, what's going on? Is he like the magic wand store in Harry Potter? I vaguely remember that. Oh, Bombadil, you deserve better. You deserved so much better than what we've got. Tolkien was very clear what Bombadil was. He wasn't a character there to drive the story forward. He wasn't a protagonist. He wasn't even really tertiary to the story. As we saw in the Lord of the Rings films, you don't need him in there. Even Tolkien said he's kind of unnecessary. But because these writers think they know better than Tolkien, that they're going to create the story Tolkien never wrote, they're going to make a Bombadil that's better. And I'm sure this isn't the only thing we're going to see about him. Once we get that trailer with Bombadil in it, oh boy, the sparks are going to fly. Oh yeah. So let's take a look at those AI-generated images of Bombadil, thanks to our member Fra in our Discord chat. All right, so this is Brian Blessed as Bombadil. Brian Blessed, a well-known British actor who has the timbre of his voice. Just look at the video of him. He does a wonderful job. And so we have him integrated into this image of Bombadil, actually from Fantasy Flight Games. And look at that face. Like, look at that. Okay, this look for Bombadil could work. It could work in the show, but we get this instead. I mean, really take a look at the color difference, the hat difference. I mean, this speaks of that bright point of light they were talking about. This speaks of somebody who's been beaten down and just came out of a long journey and needs to sit for a while. I mean, at least he's not in burlap, like not Gandalf. But where's the mirth? Where's the whimsy? Like, make that Bombadil. Don't drag him down to our level. Make him something like this. All right, so that's one option. We talked about 3 that would be interesting. One is Brian Blessed here. The second one is Jack Black. Okay, not my favorite, but at least the look is a little bit better here. We've got the coat, we've got the feather in the hat. I like that big feather in the hat, and the boots aren't quite yellow enough for my taste, but we'll go with it. Not too bad. I mean, is that it's harder to see as Jack Black, but it's not bad, right? I could see that. I'm not sure. Now, one that's very popular that Fra brought up to me is this actor, Matt Berry. If you've ever watched What We Do in the Shadows, he plays one of the vampires on that show. He also was the voice of the robot recently in the Fallout TV show. His voice, I think, could work well. His face works well too. This is Bombadil, I think John Howe, a painting by John Howe that Fra put Bombadil in. A great rendition. Again, far better than what we saw here. Far better than this. Far better than this guy. That blue is almost gray. It doesn't take much to make Bombadil just a little bit better. But the best thing they could have done is just left him out. The story that Tolkien wrote of the Second Age was already way better than anything they could have come up with. But no, they will simply continue to make sure that they are better than Tolkien. They can write the story that he never wrote, but they will write themselves into being canceled. I can't see this continuing. Bombadil will be a disaster. And if you're telling yourself something different, then you haven't watched any of the first 10 episodes of the first season, because we know what's coming based on what we have. All right, everybody, thanks for listening to this long diatribe about Bombadil, but he's important to me as a character. He's not important to the story. He doesn't make a mover shaker. But if you're not going to respect him as a character, which they are not doing in the Rings of Power, then why would we ever respect you as a showrunner? Put him in as an adventure along the way, but don't move him somewhere where he wasn't. Okay, I got to stop, guys. This is going to make me a little more hot under the collar than I already am. All right, check us out at Exploring Tolkien. Subscribe here. Give us a thumbs up. We really appreciate that. And stick to us as we keep diving into the Rings of Power and War of the Rohirrim. Hey, check out our podcast. We're going to be going over War of the Rohirrim and the appendices of Rohan and the House of Eorl over the next few episodes in our podcast. So subscribe to us there, Exploring Tolkien. Just search anywhere, your podcast app of choice, as well as on the internet, and you will find us. All right, everybody, take care, and we'll see you next time.